Okay, so I want you to imagine a land so remote, so tucked away, that it was the last major place on the entire planet to feel a human footprint. I mean, think about that. This is the story of New Zealand, a nation that was born from some of the most epic voyages in human history and then forged in the fires of conflict and cooperation. So, how did this isolated paradise become the country we know and recognize today? Well, let's dive in and find out.
And really, that's the big question here, isn't it? This incredible, rapid transformation from completely untouched islands to a thriving, complex, modern nation in what is, historically speaking, just the blink of an eye. It's a journey that is, and I mean this, absolutely captivating.
So our story, it doesn't begin with maps and empires like so many others. It starts with the sheer courage of the first voyagers. Long before it was ever called New Zealand, it was known as Aotearoa, the land of the long white cloud. So let's journey way back to its very, very beginnings.
Now just pause and think about this for a second. While great empires were rising and falling all across the globe, New Zealand remained completely untouched by people. It wasn't until around the year 1300 that the first humans, these incredibly intrepid Polynesian explorers, made an unbelievable journey across the vast, empty Pacific to find this new land, becoming the ancestors of the Maori people. And how did they do it? Well, their vessels, the waka, they were just masterpieces of engineering. I mean, we're not talking about simple canoes here. These were sophisticated, ocean-going ships. They were guided by this incredible, almost encyclopedic knowledge of the stars, the sea swells, even the flight paths of birds. It was a feat of navigation that honestly rivals any in human history. And in this new land, they didn't just survive, they thrived. They built a society as rich and complex as the forests all around them. They organized themselves into these kinship groups called iwi, with incredibly deep oral traditions, or waka that trace their lineage all the way back to those very first voyagers. Their communities were centered around these impressive fortified villages known as pa, and their spiritual beliefs were just deeply woven into the natural world. So for centuries, Maori society flourished in this splendid isolation. But, on the other side of the world, a new age of exploration was dawning, and it was only a matter of time. Soon, two very, very different worlds were destined to collide, right here. And that first meeting, it was tragically violent. When the Dutch explorer Abel Tasman showed up in 1642, a misunderstanding just erupted into conflict, and 4 of his crew were killed. Tasman, completely shaken, sailed away without ever setting foot on the land he put on his maps as New Zealand, leaving the islands to their isolation once more. It was over 100 years later that Captain James Cook's arrival in 1769 marked the real turning point. He didn't just sail by, he meticulously mapped the coastline with incredible precision, and in doing so, he opened up New Zealand to the rest of the world, for better and for worse. The era of trade, missionaries, and eventually colonization had well and truly begun. At first, the relationship was one of mutual curiosity and even benefit. Maori were really eager to get their hands on iron tools, nails, and new technologies, while the Europeans sought the rich resources of the land. This was this dynamic time of exchange, a real contact zone where two cultures met and started to reshape one another in ways neither could have ever predicted. But among all the goods being traded, one item would unleash an era of absolutely unprecedented violence: the musket. This single piece of technology ignited a devastating series of conflicts that we now call the Musket Wars. It was a brutal arms race that just tore through the islands, leaving this trail of destruction and forever changing the balance of power between the tribes. Right, so the chaos and the violence of the Musket Wars, plus this growing, totally unregulated presence of European settlers, it pretty much forced the British Crown to step in. They wanted to impose order, but their solution, a treaty, would become one of the most controversial and fiercely contested documents in all of New Zealand's history. See, the British weren't just concerned about the fighting. They saw these private companies gearing up for massive land grab. A sense of urgency really took hold, and to assert control, they sent Captain William Hobson to secure a formal agreement with Maori chiefs and establish British sovereignty once and for all. And the result was the 1840 Treaty of Waitangi, and this slide brilliantly shows you the absolute heart of the problem. This wasn't just a simple translation error. It was a fundamental clash of worldviews. The British concept of absolute sovereignty was completely alien to Maori. They understood the Maori term kawanatanga as granting a kind of shared governance, not a total surrender of their own authority, their tino rangaratanga. This massive misunderstanding would have truly tragic consequences. So the ink on the treaty was barely even dry when a flood of British settlers started arriving, and they all wanted one thing: land. Clashes were basically inevitable, since Maori and European ideas of ownership were just worlds apart. Tensions soon boiled over into the New Zealand Wars, a brutal, drawn-out conflict that raged for decades and ended with the government confiscating huge areas of Maori land, a deep grievance that still echoes to this day. And yet, even as the smoke was clearing from the battlefields of the New Zealand Wars, something new was being forged. The British colony of New Zealand was starting to develop its own unique identity, something increasingly separate from the mother country. The late 19th century was just a whirlwind of progress. New Zealand established its own parliament, its economy was booming thanks to gold rushes, and it became this beacon of social reform. And get this, in a move that absolutely stunned the world at the time, in 1893 it became the very first country to grant all women the right to vote. That's a testament to the fiercely progressive spirit of this young nation. But maybe, just maybe, the true birth of a distinct New Zealand identity was forged in the crucible of a distant war. Fighting alongside their Australian neighbors as the Anzacs in World War I, New Zealanders made an immense sacrifice. In the mud and the blood of Gallipoli and the Western Front, a new sense of nationhood was born, one that was no longer just an extension of Britain, but something uniquely and proudly their own. The 20th century would bring even more profound changes. As New Zealand tried to navigate its place in a turbulent post-war world, it also started to look inward, confronting its colonial past and really starting to embrace a new bicultural identity as Aotearoa. Yeah, the post-war era saw this dramatic reorientation. New Zealand's traditional ties to Britain loosened as it looked more towards the United States for security and increasingly to Asia for new immigrants and trading partners. It also carved out this bold, independent foreign policy, famously declaring itself a nuclear-free zone back in the 1980s. But probably the most significant shift of all was happening right at home. The latter half of the 20th century saw this incredibly powerful Māori Renaissance. This was a grassroots movement to protest historical injustices, to reclaim land and rights, and to revitalize a culture and a language that had been actively suppressed for generations. And one of the landmark achievements of this movement came in 1987 when Te Reo Māori, the Maori language, was finally made an official language of the country. Now, this wasn't just symbolic. It was a profound declaration of a modern, bicultural nation, one that was finally beginning to grapple with its past to build a more shared future. So, from the first waka navigating by the stars to the modern jets arriving at Auckland International Airport, the story of New Zealand has always been a story of journeys. It's a tale of conflict and reconciliation, of a nation that is constantly redefining itself. And as it looks to the future, the question remains, what will the next chapter of this incredible journey be?